This is the GPL Podcast from GopherPuckLive.com.
This is a 10.8% beer. Danker, hoppier.
That's a loaf of bread.
Yes, it is. It's lit. Oh, boy. Jupe making mistakes. I love it.
And so I had to train for this marathon.
Make sure you stay awake for the game tomorrow, too.
Wait a second. Hair game on GPL. Just elite say you guys got stylus. Ote mote. Now, here's Jupiter and Vigo. Good evening and welcome to the GPL Podcast, episode number 238. And there he is, Vigs. Are you ready for a Frozen Four?
Back from DC, end of the Youth Hockey Association season, ready for Frozen Four season. I'm going to Tampa this time, so couldn't be happier to see the Gophers get it done, because that means that the weekend will be a little bit more fun as we finish off the college hockey season.
Well, speaking of fun, let's bring in some fun, don't you think?
Why not?
All right. John King from Pulltab Sports. What's this, your third time on now? Oh, nice glass there. What you drinking?
You know, I have to drink gluten-free beer, so start judging me accordingly.
Oh,
this is Burning Brothers Most Coast. It's pretty good. Tastes like beer.
Thanks for joining us, kid. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm hoping for a successful technology experience this round.
Hey, you look good, and it looks like we've got a good connection, so I think we're good. Knock on wood.
Let's go with it.
Yeah, let's definitely go with it. I noticed just yesterday that your boys over there at Pulltab started a new podcast. Selly Hard? Yeah. What's this all about?
Yeah, I'm really excited. Winnie Brown and Tom Chorsky are basically doing a girls hockey pod that's meant to be kind of a place you can let the hair down and tell stories and create that locker room effect. And the funny story about it is we did a celeb game in White Bear for Hockey Day, and there was about 6 girl players that played in that celeb game. And they had trailers afterwards, and everybody was drinking beer, hanging out after the celeb game. And all the girls just went home right away. And Winnie said, you know, we got to change this, man. We got to make girl hockey players just be hockey players, because that's what they are. And so she's trying to create kind of a free space for girls hockey. I'm super excited for what they can pull off with this thing.
Well, that sounds pretty awesome, actually. I mean, that's no fun if they're just going home. You know, Vigs and I played adult hockey for the longest time, and sure, it's fun being behind the bench, but the most fun it seems like we always had was after the game, having a few, going up to the super rink and having a hot dog and a beer there, or going out to a place. That was half of it, Vigs, wasn't it?
Well, I think that's a big part of being an athlete, is the fellowship you get from your team and just being in the locker room. You know, I was probably one of those kids who was one of the last ones out after every practice, after every game, because I just enjoyed being in there in the room with the boys. And when you get done with that stage of your life, you miss it. Then you find some beer league stuff to fill that void a little bit. It's different, and I think girls need to just do the same and embrace it. I'm all about equal opportunity, so it definitely applies to hockey as well.
Well, sounds like a lot of fun, John. They've already got one show out. Was it Zumwinkle, and who else was on?
Heisey was on there.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Couple studs, and Winnie named it Selly Hard, because if you watch girls hockey, oftentimes they don't celebrate when they score. They sort of, it's just kind of it hasn't quite been unleashed the way boys hockey has, and I think her intent is to kind of bring the cowboy out of the cowgirl side of hockey.
Nice.
The boys have no problem going so hard.
Okay, sometimes it's a
little over the top, and
it's like throwing your stick out.
Although I did want Rhett Pitlick to throw his stick into the crowd after he undressed the Michigan defenseman in the Big Ten championship game. I'm glad he didn't, but I just kind of had it in me. I was like, oh man, if this was
amazing.
Goal, that'd be worthy of throwing the stick. But probably best he didn't. Good, he learned something. He's a learning kid. One of the highlights for me from the Gophers in the last month has been the play Rhett Pitlick, by the way, not to jump too far ahead, but he is starting to play through the opponents on the forecheck, and he's making some great plays all over the ice. Fun to see that kind of growth during the year.
Well, let's go back to a little bit of last weekend, Viggs, starting with Thursday's game against Canisius. Were you nervous at first? I was a little nervous, and even Bob said those first games I'm always way more nervous, he said, than further down. But I was nervous until the second period started going their way.
Well, Bob had the quote this week where he basically said, if you lose that first game, it doesn't even feel like you were in the NCAA tournament. I think the same thing applies in the World Junior. If you lose that quarterfinal game, it hardly feels like you were there to begin with. And so he knows that feeling with all that experience. And as we saw this year again, a number one seed went down in Denver. It's possible because at the end of the year, these teams are playing well. And I know I was getting a lot of texts and DMs from nervous Gopher fans about the game. And the thing I took away from the viewing, I was in DC, I was watching on the road. They were not one and done in the zone. They were not turning the pucks over at the blue lines. Those are key ingredients for winning hockey. And this year's team has the mental resilience, even in a tight game against a good goalie, not to disappear from what's made them successful. And they stuck to it, and eventually it started paying off. They got the 5-minute major, and they took advantage. This number one power play of the Gophers is elite. They are really good, and they definitely came through when they needed them.
John, were you one of those guys texting Vigo saying, what the heck's going on? Because
I actually was. I did actually communicate with Vigo that night. I'm not proud of myself. That was a stressful game. Anyone who hosted an event at their home when we played Holy Cross many years ago, as I did, I was a horrible hockey fan that night. I was turning on everyone. I wasn't sure about Motzko all of a sudden. The poor kid who had the stick handling problem, I probably would have sent him to East Africa. I mean, I was just a bad fan. I was until the third period when things stabilized, because that game is a horrible game, right? That's like the double A team. The single A team wants to play the double A team from the same town, and there's a reason you never do that. It's a no-win situation. It was awful. I hated every minute of it. I'm so happy it was over. Like, once we got past that, I was like, this could still suck, but it's not going to suck a ton. Like, we're by the bad one.
It's completely valid. I think it's completely valid because then you said, Viggs, they got the 5-minute power play. It was pretty much over after that. Then they just, 6 goals in the third. And it was the beginning of a first-round domination by the Big Ten, and it was scary what they did in those first-round games, Viggs.
I just think of the talent across the Big Ten is really high right now. Whatever the Big Ten coaches are doing and looking for is paying off. And I think this year's Big Ten schedule was better than most. I mean, you look at Penn State, they finished, 6th in the league, and they were in the tournament. And that just shows your strength of schedule in conference. The Big Ten showed it in their non-conference. They were the top team in the pairwise for a lot of the years because of that. And it was fun as a Big Ten fan to watch it. But in my mind, none of that means anything for the Big Ten until they get it done in the Frozen Four and get a title team.
Correct.
So things are looking very good for the Big Ten, but those first round games, they can get away. And those teams that have all those hopes and dreams, when they see it fading and they start pulling their goalie, it can get out of hand. And oh boy, did it ever all over the country.
And John, Corey V's got a comment here. Worst first round ever. And I've got to agree. The only overtime game we had was the last one with Michigan and Penn State. Otherwise, it was a pretty boring first round all around.
I agree. I do like the Big Ten getting some respect, though, having listened to people whine about the WCHA for 20 years, and then the NCHC kind of, they were almost like the SEC of football, right? Always dominating us. So you're right, Vigo. We have to get all the way to the top. But I did love. It was weird to be heckling people about Big Ten hockey and like having to spell it with the B and the 1 and the G and yeah. I mean,
Embrace
check the
it.
scores tomorrow. It's not getting any easier. Just look forward to double digits tomorrow in both those games too. And no, I like seeing the Big Ten flex. It made me feel better about the Gophers too.
It made me feel pretty good as well. And then, the CCHA didn't end up so well, because I don't think they scored a goal. Tech was blanked. Minnesota State was blanked by Minnesota's a future opponent, St. Cloud. Not great for old Don Lucia's league.
No, not a good performance by them. I felt like we kind of saw that coming into the tournament. These teams maybe weren't as strong. Just look offensively, they didn't have big stars. No. I think that was the difference maker for Michigan Tech a year ago and for Minnesota State, is they had a lot of talent up front besides their strong defense. They just didn't have that this year. And so I think they get in these tournament games against other teams that are deeper. It is kind of like that Class A, Class AA matchup where, the AA teams have 3-4 lines and the A teams have 1 or 2. And even this year, the top lines for Michigan Tech and Minnesota State were not that great. If I was them, I'd be looking at that Matamidi team and saying, hey, can we get some of those guys on our team and maybe give them a little more flair?
But Viggs, Mankato was playing pretty well in that game. I mean, they defensively, I thought they played well. And then once they got down, it's like they just didn't have anyone who could finish on the offense.
Well, they just don't have the firepower to fight back in a game where they fall behind. If they get the first goal, and they can sit behind their system and play back and wait for mistakes, that plays into their game plan, but they just do not have the firepower to catch up.
John, I know you saw Ohio State blanking. Or was it blanking? No, it was 8-1. It was 8-1 over Harvard. Did you see that coming? Because I certainly did not. Wow.
No, I had heard that Harvard was a very high-skilled team and fast, and the Langenbrunner kids on there, and they got that kid Farrell from the Chicago Steel. I mean, they have some real talent. That was crazy. Rowlick's a hell of a coach. It was funny to watch Buchagras almost do a marketing campaign for him to get the Wisconsin job for the entire tournament. I think Rowlick's a wonderful coach, and so that didn't surprise me. But I didn't expect the gap. That was a shocking deficit between those two teams, because Harvard was kind of the sexy pick to maybe surprise some people, I thought.
I had them in the championship game.
Stay hot.
Yeah, and that's why I'm terrible at picks. So what do you do?
I did like Ohio State, but
you did like Ohio State, but it was a sneaky pick. I don't know if it's a sneaky. I think actually one of the ESPN guys picked Harvard to go at least to the Frozen Four. I don't know. I was just thinking of Revenge Tour 1989 to beat Harvard in the championship game. That would have been nice. But what else stood out from the other games, Viggs, in the regionals this past weekend?
I think the one thing that stood out to me, as much as I've harped on the atmosphere at the regionals, it actually turned out pretty nice this year. Most of the games had good crowds, and I think they kind of lucked into it rather than it's planning and shows that the system works. I know some of our peers over at College Hockey News were trumpeting how great this regional atmosphere was and how nice everything was up in Fargo. That's because Minnesota was there and they're number one in the country and their fans show up. That's lucky for Fargo. If it's just St. Cloud and Minnesota State making that regional without Minnesota, I guarantee you is not the same. And those North Dakota fans maybe don't even find buyers for their tickets. So I think if you point to that as a successful regional because of planning, you are wrong. It would have been more raucous if the game had been at Mariucci Arena for the Canisius one. And I guarantee you, if Minnesota State was playing at St. Cloud State for that first round game, it would have been more raucous there at the Herb Brooks Center. Campus sites. Team campus sites.
I know you're big on campus sites. All right, John, what surprised you in the rest of the regionals?
Well,
Anything?
I'm kind of fascinated by Michigan, having gone to that Big Ten championship game 2 years in a row and losing by the same score. And they're fast becoming a villain. And I really think between Fantilli, who loves to play the heel, I mean, this guy loves to kind of.
He should be in wrestling. Let's go.
He is, and he's an excellent player, probably go number 2 overall. And then the goalie kicking the net off. I mean, I actually wanted them to win that game when I was watching it on Sunday. They needed to be in Tampa. I mean, we have some unfinished business, and if we're going to do this, I want to go. I want to go through all of the things, and so that was a big one for me. And I think that they're the one I don't know a lot about BU. I'm hoping you guys do, and you can tell me a little bit about them. I know they have the stud defenseman, but I'd love to see a Michigan-Minnesota final 4-3, only the other way around.
Well, BU's the only non-number 1 seed, Vigs, but really they've been a top 10 team for most of the season, top 5, right there at the end. They won the Hockey East. They're youthful, and like a lot of the players were saying today, Faber was saying today, and Johnson, they're very similar to Minnesota in the way they play. So it's probably going to be not quite like a game with Michigan, but maybe more similar. They might be a little better defensively than Michigan is, but what do you think about BU coming out over there? Because Cornell did them a nice favor taking out Denver, because Denver fell apart at the end of the season. They just did.
Yeah, I think that was the regional that might have been the most disappointing for me. I didn't think Western Michigan played particularly well in their game. And, of course, to see Denver get knocked out against Cornell, also very surprising. Denver, I think, has had a little bit of chaos to their locker room.
Two straight games getting shut out.
Right. So there's something going on there at DU that was disappointing for the tournament's sake. But BU took advantage of it. I think we'll get more into them when we do our preview show from Tampa next week, when we have Todd Molesky on, who is a hockey expert of all types there. But I think BU is a very talented team. I don't think they're as deep as Minnesota. So I think that's something that, will show when they play in the Frozen Four in Tampa. But credit to BU. They've got lots of skill. They've got good goaltending. We'll see how they match up.
So now we get to Minnesota and St. Cloud, Vigs. I was a little nervous at first because, they played us extremely well this year. Shut us out. Probably was it the only shutout we had this year? It was 3-0. Might have been. And then we beat them in overtime at Mariucci. Cooley. Boy, they came out really well against St. Cloud in that first period.
I think
Castor kept a minute.
Yeah, Castor kept a minute. I think one of the things that Minnesota didn't really do very well down the stretch coming into the end of the season was they weren't as hard on pucks in their own end, and they weren't closing off the other team from generating second chances, and they were getting beat to the net. That was not going to happen on Saturday against St. Cloud. Rewatching that game, the entire first period, the Huskies were one and done. They were getting beat to pucks. The Gophers are exiting the zone really cleanly. If you watch the Gopher forwards, they're not getting spread out. They're getting passes below the hash marks, below the dots, with speed getting out of the zone. And I think that was really key for Minnesota, is to commit to that, below the circles in their own zone and get going north. And then in the offensive zone, you saw the defensemen get involved a little bit. And if not for the penalties, Minnesota could have ran away with that game. I thought the officiating was questionable at best. The only call against Minnesota that I thought probably deserve it was the Cooley cup check penalty after the neutral zone faceoff. The rest of them, combination of dives,
did kind of grab him in the shoulder when he took him down.
He was skating through the player in the below the dots, below the red line. that's going to happen. I didn't see like the big grab. It already looked like he was going down anyway.
Mm-hmm.
They were getting a little overly involved for me. And I think Bob agreed.
Well, let's talk about that because let's see what how Bob thought about that Cooley reaction. Here he is from the post game.
Did he feel kind of like where he got to be like, I'm going to redeem myself for taking that penalty a little bit?
Well, you saw me glaring at him like over there. Like Cooley's just like his fire in his belly. I mean, he is a competitor, and every coach is going to tell you you'd rather put one out than start one. And he and I have talked about that, and it was it wasn't a good penalty, but I would much rather put a fire out than start one. And boy, you like, I love his compete level and his battle level. And next year he's even going to take a bigger step with us too.
Last one from Brad.
Watching, we all could notice the smirk on Bob's face when he says when he's back next year. No chance he's back next year. But he actually, Bob was mad about the penalty because it was a legit penalty, like you say, Viggs. But he did say it did light a fire underneath Cooley, and it's kind of not always a bad thing to take a penalty if your player's going to turn out, getting the game-winning goal just after that.
Well, I think we've seen that a lot this year with teams trying to get under the skin of Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
Ohio State's tried it. Michigan's tried it. St. Cloud's tried it. North Dakota tried it. And especially the top players for Minnesota almost go, oh, really? You want to play that game? We can play that game too, and then we'll score goals. And it's fun to see. We've talked a couple times this year. There is definitely some FU to Minnesota's game. And I think for Minnesota fans, that's fun to see because the last decade, maybe some of that's been lacking. And when Minnesota gets poked like that, they kind of go, oh, maybe I can outskill this. You're not seeing that with this team. They play through checks. They play through bodies. They answer it with checks of their own. And this is a physical team that has really impressed me this year. And it's not just the upperclassmen, it's the younger freshmen as well. They have got some real sass to their game.
John, I like how Vigo described it, the FU game. And there's one FU guy on this team who had 0 points this past weekend. Might be a little ill, a little sick or something. Matthew Nyes, kind of quiet. I thought he was tough on the puck, and he did a lot of other things than scoring. Should other teams be concerned this Frozen Four coming up, but Mr. Nyes waking up at the wrong time?
Absolutely. It sounds like he was sick. That's what I've heard, the same thing you have. But, I mean, he's a classic power forward, the kind they don't make anymore. Like, this is like LeClaire and Lindros. And, I mean, and he can protect the puck, drive it in. So, yeah, I think he's going to have an awakening in Tampa. But you really got to give Cooley credit. This kid he's on another level. I mean, I know they have the big line with the three guys, but he's more Kaprizov-like in the sense that he just makes so much stuff happen. I think he's the one that deflected that Crookshank shot or touched it at the end. I mean, he's just an animal. He can be a prick when he needs to be, which I love personally, because like you said, we haven't had a Gopher that could be a prick and be awesome in quite some time. So I love
Westrom, maybe? I mean,
yeah,
really?
Yeah, Westrom definitely had that. Yep. We haven't had that. And did you see the footage when it was the very first game against Canisius? They had a shot of Cooley during the anthem. His hair's it's like Crystal Gale right now. If any GPLer if someone can pull that off a DVR, as a hockey hair guy, it's like Raiders of the Lost Ark stuff. Your face will melt.
You a hockey hair guy? I didn't know that.
Yeah, I like to check in every now and then.
I have noticed things,
awesome.
Even Faber today, he kept going through his hair. He's getting quite the flow going too, Viggs.
It's the season, this is where it all pays off, all that hard work. the hay's in the barn and the hay's on top of the flow.
Let the fur fly, baby.
Viggs, are you concerned about Vig? Are you concerned about Nyes and his 0 point? Like I said, he didn't have any points, but I still noticed him a lot out there. He was still pushing bodies, working hard on pucks, and doing a lot of those other things. Maybe he just wasn't getting rewarded.
Well, on the Lacombe goal, he's the one providing the traffic. He's the reason why Castor doesn't see that, because Nyes knows to compete off the face-off, park himself in front of the eyes, and create that goal. He's the guy who draws a penalty that I think got the other power play goal from. He is generating lots of stuff. And I think that's the part, if we get into the Hobie hat trick stuff, why I think the national writers don't understand Nyes' game and how complete he is. When you look at Kyle Dubas come into as many Gopher games as he's probably ever come to in his entire life, it's because he's counting on Nyes to sign with them at the end of the year and contribute to their playoff run. He's not just looking at them saying, I don't want to lose him. They could have him for another 2 years. They know how good he is right now, and he is probably the most complete player in college hockey as a forward. And for Minnesota, they probably have the most complete player on the back end, too, in Brock Faber. And so when you have two guys like that can stabilize your lineup, and they both play hard, and they don't cheat the game, you're in really good shape.
All right, John, they start building up the lead. I know you're probably still nervous at home watching this. When did you finally start feeling better about that game? Is it the 2-1? Is it the Cooley goal? Or was it the Lacombe goal? Or was it when the horn went?
We had you're a true Gopher fan if you were convinced that Crookshank would score a goal against us that night. You just before the game started, you're like, I know one thing for sure is going to happen. Crookshank's going to score somehow, and he almost did. But we had a weird thing happen. I called my daughter in Boston, and I'm like, where are you watching the game? And she goes, God, we've been running around to about 10 bars because nobody has ESPNU. And I said to my buddy, I'm at my buddy's house. He's got a 20-foot screen. And I'm like, you got ESPNU, right? Nope. So we watched it on our phones for 2 periods before we got set up with Comcast on the big screen. But for whatever reason, it was way less stressful. It was like watching a horror movie, with your eyes covered. I could just process it, put it on the side, and I'm watching it. I think we're okay. But yeah, I think when Cooley scored, that was the moment, to answer your question, where I was like, let's go. Because you start to do the math on this team with the D-core and close. When you start kind of going, okay, they got to score 3 to beat us. Yeah, no, that's not happening. And that's a really good feeling with the back end.
How about Justin Close there, Viggs? At the end of the game, I was literally right behind the net. He was, right on the glass there. And there was one shot, I think right before it was the stoppage, right before Nelson hit the bank shot for the goal. There was so much traffic. I don't know how he saw the puck to grab it. He did. And even the media availability today, the guys was like, I don't know why you guys talk about how he's been underrated or whatever, all the stuff the media says. He has been so good all year, Viggs.
Well, I think coming into the year, we were nervous about what kind of goalie he was, because last year there were times when he had to make those post-to-post plays that he was not able to make a lot of saves, and he would get beat on those. He has gotten more confident, I think, with his scouting other teams' power plays. If you listen back to the postgame, Moscow talked about how St. Cloud really likes to hammer pucks from the flanks. That's kind of their power play. So Minnesota was more aggressive blocking shots in those situations, and Closer was more aggressive pushing across and getting set and seeing the pucks, because that's what he scouted, that's what he was reading, and that's what he was executing. And I think that's the difference this year for him versus last year. You look at some of the smaller goalies in hockey, for them to be successful, they have to be aggressive and they have to be confident. And that's what Closer brings to the Gophers. I don't think we saw that as much last year. but now that he's the everyday starter, you do see it.
He was great Saturday night. Absolutely fantastic.
He was. I mean, we've been pretty much on his bandwagon pretty much all season, and I know everyone comes to you, Viggs, so you're not so nice to him. I'm like, we're just going off of what we saw the previous year.
It was nerve-wracking, I think, coming into the year, having all this talent and having him be the goalie, just because you're not sure. Like, I don't watch a lot of Canadian Junior A hockey. I didn't know what kind of goaltender they were getting from Kindersley, Saskatchewan. That's not on my hockey TV to-do list every day. I didn't see the 100 games he played there. I don't know what kind of hockey is up there. I'm sorry. I don't have much time, but he's definitely delivered for them this year.
Well, one thing I wanted to bring up too is just because another funny moment at the post game, talking about the Lacombe stretch pass to Cooley, and how just came out of nowhere.
Jackson, talk about that the second goal, the stretch pass down to Cooley. I mean, did you guys see anything that he could jump that a little bit, or?
No, I think like I said, the play just kind of opened up there, and obviously Cooley has some blazing speed, so he was just taking off, and then just kind of threw up there, and then he made a great play to finish it off.
Let him get out for a second. You got to love student athletes. So we had half-hour practice yesterday. All we worked on was a stretch pass up the middle. And you ask Homer, no, it just came out of nowhere. So what the hell good is coaching anymore? Like, we did 3 drills, and they were all in the neutral zone, flying our center. So I don't think they even listened to us.
Obviously, another, there's times when Motzko can be so fun and just kind of go with the flow of Viggs. I noticed one comment you had on Twitter after I posted that. Is like, a lot of these times these players aren't even thinking about it. They've already kind of got it ingrained in them about these type of situations. But Motzko still had fun with it anyway.
He sure did. And I was just looking back. There's a moment where Brodzinski got a breakaway, and it was a pass from Faber. And it was just one of those things where that's what they had practiced going into the Michigan State series. They had practiced these things just so they're patterns. And I think that's so much of what coaching is these days, is getting these patterns ingrained in the players that are going to be effective in the game. And then the game happens and they just see it and they go. And I think that just speaks a little bit to what Steve Miller's brought to the coaching staff and the scouting, and what Bob brings in his everyday practice with the Gophers.
What do you think, John? You think the players are listening to him still?
I think Motzko's post game is must see TV. By the way, I don't know that so think of how big a game that was for Bob, right? Mm-hmm. He was at St. Cloud forever. I know my St. Cloud buddies mockingly referred to him as Big Game Bob because he had some stumbles when he was on St. Cloud, and he, everything he's gone through personally. I mean, how do you not root for this guy? I mean, he's painted our collars blue. He's built the team that we wanted and he wanted, and he's never won a championship himself as a head coach, right? Besides World Juniors and such. But I mean, I just am so rooting for this guy, and he's just so real. He's just salt of the earth, and I just thought it was. I mean, that has to be a big deal when he's like, oh God, St. Cloud, perfect, and to get it done like that. And I've heard this Steve Miller. All I've heard about this guy is he's like Yoda. Like, this is like a legit coaching tactician genius. So I don't know how we pickpocketed him from Ohio State, but sounds like he's pretty special.
How did we pickpocket him, Viggs?
Well, Miller and Motzko basically went back to their college coaching careers started together. Like, they're about the same age. They got into coaching at the same time. Miami, Ohio, Denver. And they just have gone separate ways. And I think, coaching together at the World Juniors a lot the last couple of years kind of brought them back together. And Bob felt, if you ever want to come to the Twin Cities and coach, this would be a really good fit for you. And Miller almost came to be on Lucia's staff instead of Scott Bell. And at the time, there was a bit of an uproar among Gopher alumni that they would bring in this outsider into the program that needed some stabilizing. And it probably worked out for the best that he didn't come at that time. And now is the time when he comes, because he brings those fresh eyes to the Gopher program that I think they really needed. Bob's a really good hockey coach, really good recruiter. I don't know if he's as good an X's and O guy as Steve Miller, and some of the things that he brings to the penalty kill and some of the things he brings to the scouting report, I think really contribute a lot to Minnesota and their consistency this year.
Yeah, Steve Miller's looking at that math problem on the wall at Harvard like Goodwill Hunting, right? And just solving. Well, right now he's just staring at. I picture this guy watching like 60 hours of tape on BU, just alone, eating Chinese food and being like, Bob, 3 things. And I just love that he's on our team.
Oh boy, that's pretty well. I believe Bob even said in his post-game news conference that they even changed up the penalty kill for that game, and that
because usually
Steve made the adjustments.
Yeah, usually the Gophers, when there's a penalty killer situation where the point player is moving across, the other forward kind of trades with him. Well, with St. Cloud, what they try to do is they try to do that, and then they hit the one-timer away from where the forwards are going. So instead of doing that, Minnesota started having one of their D get in the shot blocking lane and block shots. And that's something that you saw throughout the game. Actually, the one goal against, I think Chesley was a little late coming out on that because it was a new adjustment for them. And it wasn't something as quick. But when you had Faber and Lacombe out there, they were out there eating pucks.
And that's that blue collar you're talking about, John. Blocking pucks, doing whatever it takes. Get dirty goals if you need to.
Yeah, depth scoring. I kind of, it's fun to watch the Gophers and think about, like he has to love Jackson Nelson, the guy behind the guys, right? He has to love Hughlin, a Roseau boy playing for the Gophers, and getting. When I was texting Vigo not in my best fan moments, I swear against Canisius, like he never played Nyes, Cooley, and Snuggerud like the whole game. I don't know if you ever looked at the time on ice, but I'm like, God, I'm getting texts from my buddies. We're gonna lose because of our arrogance, and I'm like, and then sure enough, third period, if Canisius was rolling 2 and we were rolling 4, all of a sudden it's 9-2. But did he play them less in that game, or was I just losing my mind?
Nyes played 22 minutes 5 seconds. It was the third highest ice time of the year for Nyes.
Oh God!
Cooley played 20 minutes 4 seconds. Snuggerud 19:27. Bob shortened the bench.
Extra timeouts. Longer period breaks. You can play these guys more often. I mean, these guys train all year long in a Big Ten schedule. 12-minute breaks.
Nyes wasn't feeling good either. He was sick, and he still was able to put out 22 minutes.
I think that Big Ten schedule is great for them. The way the Big Ten runs a game, I think is an advantage when you get to the NCAA.
Hey, how about, Lacombe and that clip you showed, just Cooley's just called Cools. How about being as good as you are and your nickname is just Cools? I mean, come on. That's like Snoopy stuff, right? I mean, that's not even real, right? Like, oh, there's our best player. We just call him Cools. And he can do everything. Well, he'll be in the NHL in 5 minutes. Yeah, that's pretty sweet.
The only thing is, it's like, does Cooley have a little power there, Veeks? I mean, sure, I can come for you, play for you the last game or two. Or does he kind of hold out to the end of the summer?
I mean, if you're Cooley, you probably want them to burn a year that deal if you sign.
Yes, but that gives him some power, doesn't it?
It does. But also, by him signing at this young age, he gets to unrestricted free agency sooner. He gets that first RFA deal sooner. So there's advantages there too. I've heard all kinds of things on what's going to happen at the end of the year for some of these guys, and they're all not 100% going pro. I think Lacombe has said he's going to sign at the end of the year. Faber has been pretty transparent that he wants to sign at the end of the year. They're very focused on what they're doing right now,
Mm-hmm.
but I think you have a lot of guys who are unsure of what they're going to do next year. It's not a 100% chance Nyes is signing. It's not a 100% chance that Cools is signing. I think Snuggerud for sure is coming back according to what people say. So we'll see. But I was just looking at that shot blocking data against St. Cloud, and they blocked 25 shots. They only had 29 shots on goal.
That's
a pretty good performance.
Right
Mm-hmm.
Jackson Lacombe, 6 block shots, an offensive defenseman.
And apparently Corey thinks Jackson Lacombe looks like Napoleon Dynamite, so he's got that going for him too. Going through some of the questions here. Wasn't Close brought in as a practice goalie? He kind of was, wasn't he, Viggs? Behind Mo and LaFontaine.
That was the thinking behind 2 drafted goalies. Let's bring in a hard worker who's experienced. And I think now you're seeing that with Nathan Airy as the next goalie that Bob's bringing in, somebody who's going to have 100 games under his belt before he even comes to Minnesota, a junior.
And then Steve kind of reminds us about, 3 timeouts, 2+ minutes each. Actually, they were 18-minute intermissions, Steve, between periods for the regionals. It probably will be for the Frozen Four as well. I mean, compare that to 12-minute intermissions and 1 TV timeout. That's maybe a minute and a half, Viggs, somewhere. It's not a 30-second, but it's not overly long. And then Corey wants to know where you're getting this time on ice. You getting that from Schlossman?
A little bit. Instat tracks it. It's hard to get access to that. It's professional scouting software. Rink Live and Schlossman have access to some of it. So when I see something like that, I reach out, and I've looked at some of that for Jackson Nelson because they track D-zone draws and things like that. Power play, special teams draws, ice time there. Just because, I'm interested in how Bob's deploying his players this year, because traditionally Bob is pretty much, I'm going to roll 4 lines, I'm going to roll 6D and just let it go. This year we've seen some differences. He has tried to play the 7 defensemen for most of the season, where he's getting the young guys acclimated to the college game. He doesn't want to put too much stress on Nyes and Nelson, but at times we've seen this year when they get down to brass knuckles, he puts his best players out there, and he really wants them to compete, and he trusts them to handle the additional ice time because he doesn't do it every single week.
Okay. John, are you headed to Tampa next week?
Yeah, man, did I do a 180 between, crying on Vigo's shoulder in that Canisius game to these are all things I did after we beat St. Cloud. I emailed Terrence Fogarty and told him if we win, I want one of the new prints. I swear to God, send him a note. I asked a buddy to turn a Minnesota t-shirt into a Winnesota t-shirt. Haven't followed up on that. And then I booked my flight, my hotel, and bought the tickets on StubHub. And I am super excited to be down there. I went to Boston last year, and I heard Tampa is just an amazing site for the Frozen Four. Have you been there in Tampa?
I did go to the 2012 one when they lost to Boston College with Johnny Hockey on that team and a couple other good guys. They do probably the best job I have ever seen. You get off the plane in the airport, and there's banners everywhere. The city has banners and across, alongside of buildings. When I was there in 2012, it wasn't as developed right there. There was kind of still a big dirt parking lot and stuff. They're still developing it. I've heard it's filled in even more there. There's so much more stuff close to it. The city really gets behind it. I mean, you see it all. I mean, you could go downtown St. Paul. Do you see many banners talking about the Frozen Four when it's down there? Or even at the airport?
No.
It's different in Tampa.
The only time I had ever been was when we won it in 2002 in St. Paul on a press pass. And then I went last year, and it was just so cool. It was such a great event as a college hockey fan. Going into that, I forget the name of the bar, Greatest Bar, I think it's called, around the corner. And you walk in, the first floor is all Mankato fans. The next floor is all Gopher fans. The next floor is there's
Wow.
people in North Dakota jerseys. They didn't even make the tournament. I mean, it's a really cool event. If you're a college hockey fan and you haven't been to the Frozen Four, I would encourage you to check it out. It's a good time.
And especially in Tampa, you will still see jerseys from almost every school and plenty of North Dakota jerseys. Yes, you'll see them, folks.
Are you guys going? Either of you?
I am leaving on Tuesday.
I am leaving Thursday morning, 6 a.m.
Hey, you want to golf?
I wish I could. Maybe if we can figure it out Friday, I'd be interested. There are some availabilities and things, but that would be nice to get some sun. But I'm looking forward to it.
Todd Molesky and I will be live from the arena next Wednesday night. Or actually, we're starting early next week, folks, because we can only be in the arena till a certain time, like 7 p.m. Eastern. So we're starting about 4:30 Central, I believe. So Viggs is going to do the podcast before he has to do dinner and put the kids to bed, and then get to bed himself because you're up super early next week, aren't you, Viggs?
Yep, I've got 6 a.m. flights going there and 6 a.m. flight coming home because I want to try to be home for Easter. So it's what I've got to do to make it happen, and it's going to be a great weekend. I can't wait.
And we'll try to do some kind of live broadcast after the game on Thursday, probably while the other game's going on. We'll have just a short little thing. We'll get together, talk about the results. Probably from the media room in the bowels of, was it Amalie Arena? It's going to be a blast. I wish Viggs could get down earlier. He just couldn't with everything. But we're going to have you on, and Todd and I will be live. And I'll try to. I talked to maybe Cappy might be around. Come join us for a little bit. Wherever we end up shooting from at the arena, but. It's going to be fun. It's going to be a lot of fun. And just to let you folks know, certain lady with OnlyFans who's a big Gopher fan, look for her behind the bench of Boston University distracting them on Thursday.
Whoa. I don't know about this. Tell me
Allie
more
Ray.
about this.
Allie Ray's that kind of OnlyFans porn star, would you call her, Viggs?
Oh, this is great.
She's an entrepreneur. She's a self-employed entrepreneur, and
side hustle.
Yeah, she's a nurse who found
former military.
Yeah,
a real nurse or
yes, real nurse.
Yeah, real nurse, and she has some ties to Gopher hockey. She's a big fan. She was at South Bend this year. I know there's some people interested in that, so you will probably recognize her. Yeah, it's great to have fans.
Like she'll be on camera like the whole game.
She might be behind the Boston College or the opponent bench with a distraction
factor.
I will. Well, you see it on TV a lot in NHL games. I've even seen TV announcers get distracted by the women behind the coaches at these games.
Now, how do you get this hot tip? Are you a subscriber?
She follows us. She tweets at us.
Yeah, she follows us on the socials.
You guys have a great pod. That kind of information. I mean,
she was even I want to be on the podcast when you guys come down to Tampa. I'm like,
I'm even more excited for Tampa now. That's great. Maybe I'm going to golf with her.
There you go.
I'm out of the foursome.
You got to cook your ham for Easter.
Viggs, I did want to ask you about something. You've been kind of talking about for years how the portals, it's good for fixing holes, but maybe not something that should be relied on a lot. And we look at the news today, Schlosser put out, North Dakota currently has no returning defenseman next season. Their last guy, the guy who left, jumped into the portal. They've had a couple other guys jump in the portal. They've had other guys who they've gotten from the portal who just timed out. Mm-hmm. And it just seems like the portal is catching up with North Dakota.
It's really hard to build a culture if you don't have consistency in your program. We're obviously seeing that with Minnesota right now. There's so much leadership at the top, mm-hmm. and there's so much talent coming in, learning lessons from those leaders. You're going to have none of that at North Dakota. And it got them into the tournament last year and might have saved Brad Berry's job a little bit longer. But I think the fans up there are bringing out the pitchforks because it's going to be really hard for North Dakota next year to have their culture, because they're not going to have guys who know how to practice. They're not going to know the routine. They're not going to know how to handle criticism and who to talk to. It's going to be really tough for them. And I think that's just a sign that it's not sustainable if you keep dipping into it. It's good for one or two players there.
Exactly.
But I think even Bob goes, it doesn't work, because if you bring in the wrong person and they're on your program, it's not like free agency. You can't just cut them and bring somebody else in or call somebody else up. You've got them for the year, and not a great situation in Grand Forks.
Not that I'm crying anything, John, but
that sounds horrible. I really feel bad for them. I hope that they manage.
They do have offense coming back. They do have offense coming back, but offense only does you so.
Jackson Blake's good, and this Perron kid coming from Chicago is fantastic. Yes. This forward that they're going to get next year.
But you can only do so much with offense, guys. I mean, you could,
sir.
I mean, even if you were to bring in a young Faber, a young Lacombe, studs coming in, they're still young studs. Vigs, it's going to take them a year to learn, and I heard they had like 4 or 5 guys coming in as recruits. But are you going to fill it with more portal guys and just keep exacerbating the problem? They're
hard to say.
They're in a tricky situation.
If Matt Staudiker doesn't have a spot at Minnesota, Brad Berry should be contacting him immediately.
He would be so good up there.
He'd be great for them up there. But I mean, that's the kind of guy that they need to look for. If I were Brad Berry, I'd be looking at Wisconsin and trying to pluck some guys out of there. I'd be looking at Atlantic hockey. I'd be looking at CCHA.
Jared Moe.
Exactly. Like those are the kind of guys
they need a goalie.
Because they're going to need to fill some holes. And it was interesting. I was listening to the USCHO podcast, and they had the Robert Morris coach on, Derek Schooley, a lot this year. And he said, one of the things as a coach in Atlantic hockey is sometimes you need to sell your guys on going to Atlantic hockey and putting in 2 or 3 years to develop yourself. Hey, you didn't get your offer from Minnesota or North Dakota. Come to Atlantic hockey, establish your game, show that you can play at the college level, and then maybe in 2 or 3 years you can portal there. Mm-hmm. And that's just something that they're going to have to deal with. They're going to be kind of a little bit like a junior college sometimes with players who come there.
Junior college, really?
They cost $30,000 to go to.
So no, I just thought it was an interesting topic because I know you're like, yeah, this is great for filling spots. But what do we have? We've had a ton of guys go to the portal, and they're just not going to find as many spots unless it's North Dakota right now. It's going to become more and more difficult because teams are figuring out it's just for filling, except for a couple. I don't know. Well, we're not going to preview the fours and throw here for this week, folks. We'll get into that next week with Molesky. And let me tell you, Vigs, I was so glad to see a USCHO article from Tom Molesky. I think it was like the late Thursday night, or maybe it was Friday night, talking about all the stats and all about the Big Ten because obviously Todd's the best at all the stats and keeping records of all that stuff. And it was nice to see him back on men's college hockey.
For sure.
I'm even more excited he's going to be in Tampa.
Yep.
So we'll have that to look forward to. I don't have anything else for us tonight, guys. John, did you have any more thoughts you want on the podcast or anything you want to save for overtime?
Well, I'm excited for overtime. I'm going to go get a surprise drink, but I just want to close out by saying Brock Faber's glasses is it just makes me so happy seeing these collage posters of all the 4 players from each team. And he's just sitting there with his glasses on. It's I don't know if there's a Twitter handle for Brock Faber's glasses yet, but it's just so gangster. It's hilarious. He should play in them. He really should. It's like Urkel.
It's really great when you see Faber and Nelson at the podium, and they both have their black rim glasses on. I ran into Justin Close and those guys at Costco one day. They've all got the glasses on, and they're just like flowing it.
It's so
and
deliberate, too.
embracing
It's
it.
so
Yeah.
like they know what they're doing, right?
They probably got a
know
deal
they're
on them
like-
from Warby Parker or something like that. Let's yeah, we want the black rim glasses.
It's just outstanding. My wife was so confused. She's like, "Is our star? Does he wears glasses? This is weird." I'm like, "No, honey, this is cool. Get on board." And I had to explain to her. I'm like, "He doesn't wear them when he plays. It's like poster." Like, oh, it seems strange. I don't know how I feel about this. So good.
He does kind of have a "don't mess with me" look on that photo as part of that collage photo.
Yeah. He's in the
It's kind of like,
corner.
got the glasses. Yeah, we're not going to mess with you type of thing. It's like,
It's great.
I don't know. And of course, our guy Drew Cove looks like him with the glasses, Viggs.
Yeah, he looks like Brock Faber when he's coming out of the flu. He's lost 20, 30 pounds. Brock's pretty put together dude. So he's ready to step in the wild lineup at some point. So.
Well, thanks for joining us for the podcast, John.
Hey, no damage. Wi-Fi worked, man.
Knock on wood. We'll see how long it lasts in overtime.
You guys got a good product here. I'm going to be all about behind the bench on BU. I'm dialed in for the Frozen Four. This is exciting.
John just added binoculars to his packing list.
Oh.
Hey, kids, if you look over there, it'll be great.
Hey, if it's a distraction, it's a
it all the way
distraction
done.
for the team. That's all I care about. So,
Yeah, I hope we just get all the way, man. That's the main goal.
let's go, man. Let's go.
Time for number 6. We do not have enough national championships.
I'm with you.
It's a bit sad.
I'm with you. Viggs, you ready? You ready for Tampa, man?
I'm ready. This is one of the most confident teams I've seen in Minnesota. Just even today, both players, Ryan Johnson, Brock Faber, talked for almost 10 minutes each. Very comfortable. We had a huge media contingent today. All the cameras were there, and I've never seen two Gophers more comfortable talking in front of that many people about winning a national championship. Brock today said, it's not only about playing for a national championship, but it was a big part. And they all kind of acknowledge it, and they all kind of acknowledge it takes a lot of work to get there, and they're not there yet, but they're on the way.
All right.
Let's get her done. I'm excited.
Exactly. Let's get her done.
I'm thirsty. Let's get to OT.
Yeah.
Well, that's going to wrap
I'm
it
going to show
up.
you something good, Vigo. You're going to like what I have.
Oh.
I had to run upstairs and grab it, but
Well, you go do that because that's going to wrap it up for this week's GPL podcast. I want to thank John again for joining the podcast. And we'll be back next Wednesday with hopefully it's going to be a fun live show from Tampa. For those of you currently watching live, stay tuned for overtime for the rest of you. We'll see you next week in Tampa.